Luis and his wife Maria and their dog moved into a house with his in-laws several years ago. It had 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. They lived there for 6 years and had experienced several strange events. Most of these occurrences consisted of voices, but there were a few times when items in the house were misplaced or moved, only to be found later. To Luis's knowledge, there had to be 3 other beings or entities dwelling there. A couple of days after the family moved in, the in-laws heard someone crying in the hallway. When everyone was together in the kitchen for breakfast the next day, Luis's father-in-law, Ramon, asked his wife, Diana, "I heard you crying last night in the living room. Is everything okay?" With a confused look, she replied, "Everything is fine. Why would I be crying? Unless..." She looked at Maria. Maria looked at her mother. "It wasn't me." "Well, someone was crying, and I'm pretty sure it was a girl." "There's only 2 of you," said Ramon. Luis laughed and said, "Must be old age. Y'all hearing things." "Old age doesn't work that way, Luis. Old age is when you hear less, not more," responded Ramon jokingly. They all laughed. The family was confused, but didn't think much of it and brushed it off. About a week had gone by when Maria was working the night shift and everyone else had gone to sleep. Luis was up playing video games in their room. He got hungry and wanted to get a snack. On the way, Luis had to pee, so he made a pit stop to the bathroom. He pulled down his sweats and started to relieve himself of his urinary limitations when he heard the crying of a woman. His heart sank and he froze. Every fiber of hair on his body stood on end. Goosebumps crawled throughout his body. A sudden chill ran up his spine. At first, he thought he was imagining it, but the crying and sobbing continued from out in the hall next to the bathroom. Never in his life had he ever felt such terror and dread until that moment. Luis didn't know what to do and resisted the urge of looking into the hallway, afraid his eyes may come into contact with the ghastly figure. Of all the times it could have happened, that was the worst of all. Luis knew literally what it meant to be caught with his pants down. His fear overcame the urge to pee, so he pulled his pants up. Luis stood there debating if he should check outside the bathroom for what seemed like an eternity. When he finally summoned enough strength, he took a shuddering breath and slowly turned his head to look. Luis made sure not to look too high as he was afraid to see anything he may regret. Maybe even seeing the woman's legs or feet was better than meeting her gaze, he thought. Either way, both ideas didn't appeal to him, not even in the slightest. Their room was right across the hall from the bathroom. He quickly scanned the ground and was relieved when he saw nothing but the light coming from the room he had left on earlier. Luis could see the bed from where he was. Underneath it was his dog Tuco, who was still awake and staring back at him. Luis called for his dog, but even he ignored his master's commands. The dog clearly heard him as he stuck his head up. Then with a whimper, Tuco placed his head back onto the floor. It was no use. Even the usually brave corgi wasn't coming to Luis's rescue. The only response he got from Tuco was some raised brows and a whine. His dog was clearly struck by the same fear that had affected him. He decided at that moment it was now or never. Luis swallowed hard and turned off the light to the bathroom as he scurried across to the safety of his bedroom. Although it was only a few feet away, it felt much longer, especially in the dark, with the specter awaiting him in the hallway. Luis didn't even bother to wash his hands. The thought of the ghost suddenly grabbing at him certainly crossed his mind, and it gnawed at him. He had his head down, both eyes closed. Luis even had one hand covering them just in case shutting his eyes wasn't enough. He used his other hand to feel his way back to his room like a blind person. The sobbing got closer and louder as he made it to the hallway. The sense of dread grew with every step, and it chilled him to the bones. His heart drummed heavily against his chest, and his body quaked. Only when he felt the surface of the door did he open his eyes. He rushed in, pushing the door closed behind his back. He jumped into bed and let out a huge sigh of relief. His terrifying encounter with the crying woman, he nearly forgot he had the game on pause, but at that point, he didn't want to continue playing anymore. Luis turned off the game console, but left the lights on and the TV to drown out the noise from outside. Maria was spooked when Luis told her about the crying woman the next day. She thought it must have been what her parents were referring to when they said they heard crying out in the hall a few days ago. About a month later, while everyone was at work, Maria was in the kitchen packing lunch before heading to her job. She heard a whisper. She stopped for a second to listen, but it ceased. Maria resumed packing her lunch when she heard it again, but this time clearer. The voice sounded like it came from a little boy. She spun around and surveyed the whole kitchen, but saw nothing. Freaked out and feeling uneasy being there alone, she finished packing the rest of her lunch quickly and left the house. The next morning, she told Luis about what happened, and they suspected that something really strange was going on with the house. Early one morning, when Luis and Maria were getting up, they heard a humming from somewhere within their room. They stopped, wide-eyed, and looked at each other. Did you hear that? Maria stuttered. Yeah, I heard. It sounded like someone was humming, answered Luis. Right? She started mimicking the tune by humming it herself. It wasn't anything neither of them were familiar with. That's it. That's what it sounded like. Luis swallowed hard as goosebumps crept on him. He shuddered at the thought of the tune. What are we going to do? Asked Maria. I don't know. I've never dealt with anything like this, Luis replied. They had no choice but to continue living there, since they couldn't break the lease, and it was expensive living anywhere else. The couple finally brought it to the attention of their parents, who asked the landlord about it, but he swears he doesn't know anything about it at all. The family eventually had the house blessed by a priest. After that, a few months went by without any disturbances. Then late one night, when Luis and Maria were in their room, she was watching TV while Luis was asleep. Maria was catching up on the news and started to nod off. She caught herself mid-nod and decided to turn in for the night. Maria used the remote on her nightstand to power off the TV. At that instant, a voice shouted out from nowhere, as clear as day, "No!" It was the boy again. There was no doubt about it. Creeped out, Maria threw the covers over her head. She nudged Luis anxiously, waking him up. What? Why'd you wake me up? Luis asked, sounding cranky. It happened again, she whispered. What? The boy. I was watching TV, and when I turned it off to go to bed, he yelled at me. Well, what do you want me to do about it? Maybe he still wanted to watch TV. Luis laughed. Not bothered by what had just happened, he told her to go to sleep, and she did. The rest of that night was uneventful. More time passed by, and life went on like that for the family. It became almost normal for them. The hauntings didn't happen often, but they still occurred nevertheless. Every once in a while, Luis's 7-year-old nephew Jaime would sleep over when his parents were out of town. The rest of the family weren't home yet, so it was just Luis and Jaime. Luis was in the living room watching TV after dinner when Jaime came running and screaming out of the bathroom. ¿Qué pasó, Jaime? Luis asked, getting up from a slouched position on the sofa. He saw that Jaime was naked, dripping wet from head to toe, his hair and body still covered in soap. There was a watery trail from the bathroom to where the boy stood. Luis could still hear the shower running. "There's somebody in the bathroom," Jaime cried. He was spooked, and his eyes were red with tears. "There's no one in there," replied Luis. Knowing what goes on in the house, he actually doubted his own words. Luis was afraid, but he kept a brave face for his nephew's sake. He guided the boy back toward the bathroom. "Don't cry. Come on, I'll show you. There's nothing to be afraid of. You have to wash all the soap off or else it'll get sticky." Luis stood at the door, looking in. "I don't see anyone. Do you? She's in there," Jaime said, shivering as he pointed at the shower. Luis went in and reached for the shower curtain, hoping there won't be anything behind it. "No, don't! She'll get you!" Startled, Luis stopped for a second, gained his composure. Then he whipped the shower curtain aside. There was nothing except rising steam and water from the showerhead spraying the tub below and the tiled wall next to it. He let out a sigh of relief, then turned back to address his nephew, who was still cowering by the door. "Look, there's no one here. Now hurry back into the shower. I know you're getting cold." Jaime carefully studied the bathroom before slowly walking in. "She was right there," he pointed at the wall opposite the showerhead. "Come on, kiddo. There's no one there. We already checked. Now let's go. Chop chop." "But she was..." "No buts, Jaime. Get in now before I call your mom and dad." "Okay, but you have to stay here with me," he said, trying his best set of puppy dog eyes. "I'll be right outside if you need me. I still have to clean up the mess on the floor," Luis answered. Jaime's puppy dog eyes didn't work, at least not anymore. Maybe a few years ago, but now his nephew just looked silly. He gestured toward the shower and waited until Jaime reluctantly climbed back in before heading out. The next day, Luis asked Jaime why he ran out of the bathroom that night. Jaime replied, saying there was a girl being mean to him. He added, "She even pinched my arm." Luis examined the boy's arm, but didn't see anything suspicious. From Jaime's description of the girl, Luis gathered she must have been about the same age as his nephew, which would also make her the third ghost in the house. It made him wonder if there were others. Through that, every so often, Luis would find items that were placed in odd areas of the house. One time he found his toothbrush in the kitchen, but had no memory of leaving it there. Another time, Luis found Maria's curling iron next to the kitchen sink. The time after that, there was a cup placed on the ground next to the wall between their rooms in the hallway. Whenever Luis asked his nephew about the misplaced items, he always said, "The girl put it there, then went inside the wall." It almost seemed like something out of The Sixth Sense. Though Luis had never seen or heard the girl, it was not hard to believe his nephew because of the other events that took place. The family never had any guests stay over until Maria's cousin came by. She was from out of town and was supposed to stay over for a few days, but that changed after the first night. The couple warned her their house was haunted, but she just laughed it off. That night, she slept out in the living room and was visited by the crying woman. Next day, she took all of her belongings and checked into a nearby hotel. Ever since then, she never slept over again. The family eventually moved out a few years later, and the house is still being rented even till this day.